For the past 15 years or so, the accepted wisdom on the Middle East is that everybody knows what the solution to the Middle East conflict between Israel and its enemies is. Everybody knows what the solution to the Middle East conflict between Israel and the Arabs is. You need a two-state solution. In fact, there are writers who call it the TSS. They've given it initials. The two-state solution. Are you for TSS or against TSS? TSS is the way to go. Everybody knows it. Right to left, north and south, east and west. Everybody knows there's one answer. It's a two-state solution. And if you ask Dennis Ross and other peace processors from the Clinton or the Bush administration or what have you, everybody knows it's a two-state solution. You need a two-state solution. And of course, the Obama administration has made the TSS the focus of their Middle East policy, whether regarding the mullahs in Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia. It's a two-state solution. That's what we need. But what is this? Is that true? Are they right to say that everybody knows and everybody's right? Well, first of all, there's a caveat emptor here, which is that you can be pretty sure that when all the experts are agreed on something, they're probably wrong, because that's just the nature of the beast. This is groupthink par excellence. And then the second question is, what is a two-state solution based upon? Well, it's interesting because right now it seems as though there's never been any other thinking out there, as if we received this writ from heaven, at the time of creation, that says there must be a two-state solution in the Middle East. But that's not true. In fact, this was not U.S. policy. It certainly wasn't Israeli policy until relatively recently, in 1993. Until 1993, say from around 1967, after the Six-Day War, in which Israel liberated Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and Gaza and the Golan Heights and even the Sinai Peninsula, from its enemies who were trying to destroy it, you had a situation where the United States and Israel looked at these lands that Israel took control over in that war and said, well, okay, this war happened when Israel was tiny. It was a size so small that you had to, in fact you still do, but at that point you really had to write Israel in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, because on maps there wasn't enough room to write the word Israel on the territory of Israel because it was so small. But I said, well, what is this land? What are we supposed to think about this greater Israel, this Israel now that has turned into a state to be reckoned with from a little statelet that you could barely find on the map, a speck. And Israel and the United States came up with this idea, which was that, this whole war and the takeover, the Israeli takeover of this land occurred because of a fundamental problem in the region, which is that since the dawn of modern Zionism back in the mid-19th century until 1967, and of course beyond, the main core problem in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel is that the Arabs simply didn't accept the Jews' right to self-determination. And the only way that there's going to be any sort of solution to the conflict, any sort of resolution to the conflict between the Arab world and the Jewish state, is for the Arab world to accept Israel's right to exist, and for Jews to have self-determination in their ancient homeland of Israel. And until that happens, until that fundamental shift in Arab opinion towards Israel takes place, there can't be any peace. Whatever the size of Israel, as Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, famously said back in 1937, he would accept an Israel the size of a tablecloth if the Arabs would only accept its right to exist. But the Arabs wouldn't even accept an Israel the size of a tablecloth or a postage stamp. They said no, didn't matter how big it was. And so the American view and the Israeli view from 1967 on, when Israel became large or medium-sized with all the lands that it had taken control of in that war, was, this land is maybe bargaining chip for future peace. It may not be, but what is clear enough, and it's reflected in Resolution 242 of the UN Security Council, which sort of was the basis of a ceasefire at the end of the Six-Day War, is that first the Arabs have to recognize Israel and secure and recognize defensible borders, and after that we can talk about the resolution of these lands. But until they pass that first test, explicitly and truly accept Israel's right to exist, it doesn't matter how big Israel is. And this was, again, this was the American view and this was the Israeli view. On the other side of the fence were the Europeans and Soviet Union at the time, what's now Russia, and the Arabs, who said, no, 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 no. The guilty party or the responsible party for the prolongation of the Middle East conflict is not the Arabs. It's not that the Arabs reject Israel that has served as the basis for the Middle East conflict. Rather, it's that Israel is too big. It's all these lands. And never mind the fact that we 3 times tried to destroy Israel between 1948, when the Jews established their state and declared independence, and the 1967 Six-Day War. Never mind that we've been launching a continuous terrorist war against Israel since it was founded as well, with thousands of Israelis being killed over the intervening 19 years. No, 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 no. Never mind that the Arab League and Fatah terrorist organization and other terrorist organizations are committed to the elimination of Israel, physical elimination of Israel. None of this is important. What we're saying now is that all of this, it's as if it never existed, and now we're starting a new leaf, and we're saying that Israel is a colonialist enclave of the West, and that all of these lands that they took control over in the 1967 war are as if they've always been under Israeli control, because our argument today is that Israel is too big. It's Israel's size. They stole our land. Which land did they steal? Was it Tel Aviv that the Jews founded in 1909? No. Was it the agricultural land in the Jezreel Valley that Israel began cultivating in the late 19th century? No. It was Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip. All of these areas are occupied, they claimed. They belonged to a people that never existed until 1969, when they suddenly came into existence, called Palestinians. And the reason that there is a Middle East conflict is because Jews are there, or because Israel controls these areas. And until Israel gives them up, until they relinquish land, there can be no peace. And that is when the whole idea of land for peace started. And that is when the idea of a two-state solution, at least in its present formulation, began after 1967. There was an attempt to have a two-state solution, by the way, before that. In 1947, the UN partitioned the British Mandate of Palestine between a Jewish state and an Arab state, and the Arab state was rejected by the Arabs because they wanted the Jewish state too. In 1926, the British themselves carved out the mandate, which included what is presently Israel and the West Bank and Gaza on the one hand, and the Kingdom of Jordan on the other hand, on the east bank of the Jordan River. All of that area was supposed to be, by the 1922 League of Nations mandate, area that was supposed to be a Jewish state. And they said no, 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 and they took 65% of that land and they gave it to the Hashemites, who were Iraqis, and they made the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan there. And so that was supposed to be the Arab state. So the Jewish state just kept getting smaller. And then, back in 1967, the Soviets said, no, 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 we're going to say that the source of all this problem is that it's the size of Israel. And we need a two-state solution. We need Israel to relinquish these lands and give them to the Arabs. And then later it became give it to the Palestinian Arabs, who, again, were created in 1969. So we have the situation where there were two different ways of looking at the basis of the conflict, the American and Israeli view, which was that first Arabs have to change, and then we can talk about the size of Israel. And there was the Arab, Soviet, European view, which was that Israel has to change, Israel is guilty, its size is responsible for our rejection of Israel, never mind the fact that we've been attacking it even when it was small. Israel has to give up these lands. And so the two-state solution in its present form was born. And you know, what do we see? We see that the first view, the American-Israeli view until 1993, was based upon fact. That, in fact, the Arabs rejected Israel's right to exist. And, of course, you can't have peace if one side of a conflict rejects the other side of the conflict's right to exist. And on the other hand, you had a false view, which was that all of this only started in 1967, in June 1967, in the aftermath of the war. What happened before that is irrelevant, and Israel is responsible for everything because now it's too big. So that was where the two-state solution view, as we presently see it, was concocted. And it's important to understand that, because when we realize that the pedigree of this view is based upon a historical falsification of reality, we understand that really there's a problem at the very foundation of the view that everybody now knows has to be the solution to the Middle East conflict, because it's based on a lie. But let's go forward. So in 1993, what happened? In 1993, Israel decided to recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and began a peace process with the Palestinian terrorist organization, the PLO, and their main faction called Fatah, to establish essentially a Palestinian state in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, and presumably in parts of Jerusalem that Israel took control over in 1967. That is, in 1993, the Israeli government, led at the time by Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, rejected Israel's previous view, and the American view, by the way, of the nature of the conflict, and accepted the European view, the Soviet view, and the Arab view that, in fact, the way to resolve the conflict was for Israel to get smaller, to attempt to appease the Palestinians, give them a state, and they would make peace with Israel. And then, of course, the Arab world, because the only reason that they were having a conflict with Israel to begin with was because of Israel's side, would join in with Yasser Arafat and normalize their relations with Israel, accept Israel as a permanent state in the Middle East, and stop fighting it, and stop teaching their children that they should seek its destruction. Well, as we know, that little plan didn't work out very well. Over 1,500 Israelis have been murdered in terrorist bombings and attacks since 1993 by Palestinian suicide bombers and other various and assorted murderers that have all emanated from the areas that Israel ceded to Yasser Arafat and the PLO in 1993 and since. We see that Israel pulled out, lock, stock, and barrel, expelled 8,000 Jews from their homes in 25 communities in the Gaza Strip in 2005, and it became very quickly a Hamas enclave and one of the most important new nodes of the global jihad. So we see that this isn't true. And we've borne it out almost every day, whether it's by looking at the Palestinian textbooks, which rather than teach children in the Palestinian areas that they should seek peace with Israel and live at peace with their neighbors and strive for good relations, tells them that Jews are vermin and viruses and cancer and should be murdered, and praises terrorists, murderers, etc. And we see it in their mosques, and we see it in their military training of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds in Palestinian day camps, and we see it in their terrorist bombings of Israel. And we see it in the statements by their leaders, from their most moderate, like Mahmoud Abbas, who calls for Israel to be destroyed, to their most extreme in Hamas, which of course called for Israel to be destroyed. So we see that, bearing in mind that the two-state solution was based upon a lie, it continues to not work. And then the question is, okay, Glick, if this is the history, if what you're saying is correct, what can be done? What can possibly be done? This is a horrible situation. There's constant instability in the Middle East because there's no peace between Israel and its neighbors, and they're terrorists, and they bomb people, and then they blame bombings everywhere from Madrid to Buenos Aires on the size of Israel. And what are we to think? How do we fix this? What's your solution? So here's the deal. Any solution has to begin with reality. And one of the first important things that we have to do in order to embark upon a resolution of the conflict, to the extent that it's possible to reach one, to the extent that I have the power to change anything for the better, not being an Arab who rejects Israel's right to exist, but rather being an Israeli or being an American, what can I do? So first of all, you have to look at reality straight in the eye and say, okay, this is the situation as it is. And given that this is a situation, that the fundamental cause, the prolongation of this conflict is the Arabs' refusal still today to accept Israel's right to exist, I have to realize that I don't have the capacity to resolve the conflict because I'm not an Arab. And I can't change their minds. They have to change their minds. I can't, take a magic wand and point it at 85 million Egyptians, or at 4 million Palestinians, or at 100 million Arabs and say, accept me. And then, with some fairy dust or something thrown into the mix, they'll suddenly say, okay, wonderful, we will. No, it has nothing to do with it's beyond the capacity of Israel or the United States to convince the Arabs. It's something that they have to do on their own. So one thing that America could do, Israel really doesn't have the capacity to do so, is to encourage Arabs, empower Arabs who want to accept Israel, who want to make peace with Israel, fund their think tanks, fund their educational programs, empower them, help them. Because the stronger they are, the stronger will become a constituency which today really doesn't exist in the Arab world to really resolve the problem by accepting Israel's right to exist in whatever size. So that's one thing that America can do, perhaps through public diplomacy or through funding of different foundations, private foundations, non-governmental foundations in Arab countries. That's one thing. The Obama administration, unfortunately, has curtailed all U.S. support for democracy movements in the Arab world, but they might perhaps want to reconsider that. But aside from that, what can be done? Well, what can be done is that Israel can secure its own interests, recognize that its own neighbors in the Palestinian Authority are terrorists bound, set, and committed to its destruction, and therefore take whatever military steps necessary to prevent them from continuing to harm it. It can stop and should stop with the encouragement of the United States trying to appease unappeasable terrorists and accept them for what they are, unappeasable terrorists, and fight them until they realize that they have nothing to gain by trying to kill Israeli men, women, and children. So these are the kinds of things that the United States and Israel can do, and they're important to do because what they'll really do is bring clarity to a situation that unfortunately over the past 15 years has become extremely murky. We have given terrorists reason to believe that they can win by appeasing them, by constantly blaming Israel for the absence of peace. What the United States and consecutive Israeli governments have done is encourage them to continue killing, because not only have we said that there's no price to be paid for their bad behavior, we've rewarded their bad behavior, and that has to stop. We can't get the Arabs to change their mind about Israel, but we can stop giving them reason to think that their rejection of Israel is the key to their survival as regimes and to their success as communities. The Palestinians, by rejecting Israel, have become the largest international aid recipients in the world, in fact, in human history. We can stop rewarding them for bad behavior, and I say that if anything that can be done, if anything can be effectively done to change the minds of the Arab world, the first thing that you can do is stop doing harm. Stop convincing them that this is a good idea, this is a reasonable policy for them to put forward. What I call this plan is not a peace plan, and it's not a pie in the sky idea that everything will be resolved as a result of doing this. I call this a stabilization plan. We want to stabilize the situation. You stabilize the situation by taking active measures that destabilize the situation. When you empower terrorists by giving them land, by building up military forces under their command, by giving them money to spend on expanding still more their capacity to kill and to corrupt their own societies, you are stabilizing the situation. When you stop it, because you stop destabilizing the situation. So just as by definition, when you empower terrorists, they are empowered. When you stop empowering terrorists, they stop being empowered. And that means that their ability to cause you harm is decreased. And to the extent that you're decreasing their ability to cause you harm, you're stabilizing the situation. You're making it better. You're making it more secure. You're making it more peaceable. We have to stop thinking that we can sign a treaty at some big party on the White House lawn or at some international convention center in a European capital or in Israel somewhere, and that everything will be fine. Mankind doesn't operate like that. People don't think like that. They don't behave like that. People are moved by evolutionary changes. Over time, it takes time. You have Palestinian society, Arab world at large, that has been indoctrinated for generations to seek Israel's destruction. It's not going to change because some dictator in this country or that country signs a piece of paper with a Jew. It's only going to change when they don't have any reason to believe that by fighting the Jews, they're going to be victorious, or that they will be able to increase their fortunes by supporting terrorism, or anything else for that matter. And these are the sorts of things that Israel must do. These are the sort of things that the United States should do. And that involves a complete change of American policy and Israeli policy. It involves going back to the pre-1993 understanding of the nature of the Middle East conflict. That it isn't about land for peace. It isn't about Israel's size. It's about Israel's existence. And until the Arab world truly accepts Israel, that means teaches their children to accept Israel. That means teaching their military forces that they shouldn't be training for war against Israel. That means stop having mosque preachers calling for the elimination of the Jewish vermin. Until that happens, the conflict will continue. The most that we can do is take away any impetus we may be giving the Arabs to believe that they actually stand to gain from advancing the cause of Israel's destruction. So that's a stabilization plan. And that's the skinny on the two-state solution, which is no solution to anything except perhaps for the yearnings of people who wish to see chronic war and instability in the Middle East. Thank you very much for listening.